Thank you, Daniel, for the great introduction. Yes, so I will be talking about Pinia Colada, but before I wanted to say that I am super happy to be here. Ich bin sehr glücklich und sehr zufrieden, hier bei Ihnen zu sein. Thank you. Couple of years of German courses. German is not that easy, right? Well, anyways, do anyone here has ever heard about Pinia Colada? I'm not meaning the cocktail, right? I meant something else. Anyone? Oh yeah, a couple of people. Nice, great, congratulations. That's great. That makes me happy. Well, so I will go into the subject within a few minutes, but before, let me just very quickly introduce myself. So my name is Elise Patrikainen. I live in Paris. I am a freelance front-end developer. I'm working for a couple of clients, including NuxLab. And I am also the co-organizer of the meetup Vue.js Paris, where speakers are very welcome. And by the way, I am absolutely delighted to say that last week we had 2 persons from Germany, one from Düsseldorf and the other one from Berlin, who came to us, so it was great. We really had a great time. So if some of you feel like sharing something with the Parisian Vue community, just feel free to come to talk with me. I will be very, very happy to exchange with you. Well, enough of speaking of myself and promoting the meetup. Let's go into an introduction. So before talking about Pinia Colada, I would like to say a few words about global state. By global state, I mean the state in our application, of course. So we all know what it is. Global state is made of, but the question would be more, what is global state made of? And it's made of 2 things. The client state, which is a state which belongs to our application, and what I will call here the server state, which is simply the data that we fetch, that we pull from the server, right? It's not related with SSR, I mean, it's independent. That's basically the idea. So we have the state pulled from the server and the state which belongs to our application. I guess I am not teaching you anything here. Let's just have a quick example, because this is really important to make sure that we are all on the same page. If we take this fake e-commerce application, the articles would be what I will call the server state. And this, like the user selection, provided it has not been persisted on the backend, what will be what we call here client state. I am precising that because also I don't think there is like a specific denomination. So let's just agree we mean that with these terms during this talk. And why am I talking about that? Because these states are not equals. They have major differences. Well, they have major differences that maybe we can summarize in 2 main points. The first point is about synchronicity. Like, client state is, of course, synchronous. Like, we can get it whenever we want. It's OK. But server state is, of course, asynchronous, which means that we have a couple of complications, such as handling the asynchronous states, loading, errors, and so on. And also, we may want to cache it, because we, of course, don't want to fetch it every time that we need it. So that's a first major difference. The second one is about the ownership of the data. In the client state, the data is only owned by our application. Like, nobody can mutate it, except the user, of course, but then we have control on it. In the case of the server state, that's a shared ownership, which means that the data that I fetch can be at any time mutated by someone else or even by myself. And this means that we never know if the data that we have currently in our application, if it is still stale or not, if it is still synchronized with the server or not. This implies that we have to refresh it, either at a specific moment or maybe on a regular basis, depending on the cases. And this these 2 points can lead to complexities with common storage patterns. What are common storage patterns? Generally speaking, when we think about keeping our data in our application, the most obvious pattern is to keep it in a local scope. For example, in a component. That's really the most obvious one. There is, of course, a limitation, which is we don't have cache. When our component is unmounted, the data is gone, and we will have to fetch it again once we remount this component. So what can we do? We can put the data in a store, right? That makes sense, because the store are here to give some cache, to provide some cache. So that's great. But we still have a limitation. As I mentioned just on the slide before, we might need to refresh the data. And the thing is that with, regular stores, usual stores, we don't really have the tools to refresh the data. We can, of course, rebuild it. But we don't really have, out of the box, the tools to refresh the data at specific points or even on a regular basis. So these 2 solutions are not ideal. And besides, these 2 points are not the only issues. There are lots of other issues that we have as soon as we are doing server state management. For example, I mentioned already, handling the states, the asynchronous state, such as loading, error, and so on. We have the question of the request deduplication. If I have 2 components who need the same data at the same time, I, of course, don't want to have 2 calls, 2 parallel calls, which are fetching the same data. Other interesting question, when do I refresh the data? Should I refresh it on component mount, for example? Shall I refresh it after a mutation? Of course, we should. What happens if the user leaves the application, leave it open, and comes back? Maybe we should handle something on the window focus. Maybe we should handle the case where the user has been disconnected and he's reconnected. And last but not least, we have the question of garbage collection. What do we do with all this data if it is inactive? Should we keep it or discard it? And even so, how do we track the fact? How do we know that the data is or is not active? So, as you can see, it's like a rabbit hole, actually. As soon as you start working with server state management, there are lots of questions, lots of things. And that's the reason why it's quite complicated. And if you are still not convinced with all that I said, then I would suggest to have a look to Natalia Teplurina's talk. So Natalia is a Vue core team member. You probably know her. And she did a talk in Vue Amsterdam in 2022. So I know it was more than 2 years ago. It's like an eternity for us in the front-end development. But still, her talk is still very actual. And yeah, it's a really great talk. She really demo how quickly server state management can become complicated. So the question now is, what can we do? Well, answer, we can use a server state management library. Cool. But what is actually a server state management library? I am asking the question, you probably, I guess some of you already have some ideas about that or even used it. But still, I want to precise that because there is no common definition term. Like every project has a bit his way of defining things. So let's just agree that we will call these tools server state management library. So there is the first one, it would be Vue Appolo, which is really a great library. But it has one limitation. It is that it is, of course, working only on GraphQL. But that's a very great tool. The second one is TanStack Query, which is also a super great tool, and which is working with everything. You may have used or heard about React Query or Vue Query, and TanStack Query is actually the framework agnostic version of all these projects. Of these projects have been merged into a JS core, and they are now it's completely agnostic. Out of curiosity, how many people are using Vue Appolo or TanStack Query? Okay, thank you. In case you're interested, I did a talk this year in Amsterdam about TanStack Query. And now, be careful, there will be like a violent visual effect. We have now a third tool. I was afraid it might be too bright. We have a third tool, which is Pinia Colada, and which is designed on Vue and only for Vue. This list is, of course, not exhaustive. There are some other libraries, but I just haven't mentioned them because let's say that Vue Appolo and TanStack Query are really the main tools, and I hope one day Pinia Colada also for the Vue community. But there are other projects, it's not exhaustive. Okay, so let's jump into the subject now. What is Pinia Colada? Well, that's a project which has been created by Eduardo Sanmartin Morote, alias Posva. So you certainly know him as well because he's a Vue core team member. He has created the Vue router, he has created Pinia and other things. And now he also has created Pinia Colada. And so what is Pinia Colada? The definition in the documentation is that Pinia Colada is a data fetching layer on the top of Pinia, which in other terms actually mean that Pinia Colada is a set of stores, Pinia stores, which are pre-configured for data fetching and data management. So of course Pinia is needed. And it's quite minimal, it's 3.1 kilobytes minified. And a big warning, it's not stable yet. So it's not usable in production, but it's still already advanced enough like, to be usable. I mean, you can try it. So before going to the demo, just a very big overview of how the things work. By the way, Pinia Colada API is very close to TanStack Query API. So if you have used TanStack Query, you will definitely not be lost in Pinia Colada. That's quite near, at least for the basic things. And so there are basically two notions which are important to have in mind. The notion of queries, and which are here to fetch the data, and the notion of mutations, which mutate the data. And that's also the same in Vue Appolo. Well, so what does a query looks like? A query actually to create, to run a query, we are using a composable which is called a use query. And that's quite easy. That's nothing like especially original, I would say. So this composable accepts a configuration object. So we can see we have a key, we have the query, the stale time. It accepts a configuration object with options. So the key is mandatory one. That's the key of the query in order to store it in the store. The query is the actual way of fetching the data, because, of course, Pinia Colada is not fetching for you the data, it's on the top of that. So you will have to pass the actual function which is fetching the data. So here I'm using fetch, for example. And then you have a couple of options. Here, for example, I have the stale time, which is probably the most important option, which is the amount of time during which the query will be considered as valid. This means that if we need this query before here 15 seconds, if we need the data of this query before 15 seconds, we will not refetch. Whereas if we need this data after 15 seconds, we will refresh the data to make sure it's fresh. I will show you in a few minutes. So that's all for queries. And then we have mutations. Mutations, they are exactly based on the same idea. We have a composable called useMutation, and to which we pass the mutation function. And then we have lots of options. We will have a look later in the demo. A difference, so quite important, between queries and mutations is that mutations are imperative, whereas queries are declarative. What do I mean with that? I mean that queries are meant to be run by the library. We are not triggering ourselves the query. We are expecting the library to do it for us. For example, on component mounting, we will see that later on the demo. Whereas for the mutation, we of course don't want that, because can you imagine a mutation which is triggered each time a component is mounted? Of course, it wouldn't work. So for mutation, we want to be able to trigger it by ourselves, and that's the reason why the composable useMutation is exposing a mutate function. So that's the main difference, I would say, to have in mind between queries and mutations. OK, so let's go to the demo. A little warning about that. It will be a bit more challenging because I am using a locally packaged version of Pinia Colada because I wanted to show the latest features. But for some reason, I lost all the typing. So hopefully, it will work anyway. Maybe that's too small. Let's try to make it bigger. So that's the reason why all the typing is red. But of course, on the real project with a real release, you will not have that. Is this big enough, or should I make it bigger? Bigger? Like this? OK. OK, so what I suggest would be, oh, sorry, I haven't showed you the application that we will be working on. So this is a contact application. Oops, little responsivity issue, yeah. This is, yes, a contact application where we have contacts and where we can see some details and so on. That's very basic application. And that's about the Simpsons, because the Simpsons are cool. OK. So what we are going to do first, we will, so here so far we have we are using suspense. We just have a regular call here to get all the contacts. And what we are going to do is to change this and use a query instead. Oops, sorry. So we won't need that anymore. I remove it, and then we will get it back from the query. So the query is returning some data. That's what we will get, data. I will rename it as contacts. That's easy, finally, because Copilot knows already what I want to do. And I will use query. And now I have to configure useQuery. So I will add a key, query key, key to, that's only key, which is always an array, because we can have several parameters. Here, that's for all the contacts, so we don't need it, but we will see that with another query. And then the query function. So actually, that's easy. I just have to get this, get all contacts. And that's pretty much all. We will add a stale time as well of 15 seconds. OK, let's hope that this is working as expected. So the API, yeah. So the API is on purpose a bit slower. That's for us to be able to see what is happening. So yeah, as you can see, we had our call which has been done. If I am navigating and I am coming back, as you can see, oh, maybe you cannot see actually. I should make it this bigger as well. But actually, I don't know how to do that. Sorry? Oh, thank you. Great. So that's much better. So as you can see, we navigated, we came back on that page. We didn't have any refresh because our data, we were before 15 seconds, so our data was still fresh, and we didn't need to refresh it. If I go again and then I come back, then I have the refresh, which is working. So that will be all for the query. For the moment, I will come back on the query in a few minutes. I see that time is really running fast. Let's try to do a mutation. So in the mutation, we have, for the mutation, we have here this button, which enables us, well, actually, it's already a favorite, but which enables us to set a character as favorite or not favorite. So we will work on that. So here I have as well a regular call, which is add favorite. And I will change that and use a mutation instead. So I don't need that anymore. So I will get back my mutate function, which I will rename add favorite. And then I will use the use mutation composable, to which I will pass. Oh, sorry, we don't need key for mutation, it's not mandatory. But what is mandatory, so we're doing anything. Well, without typing is a bit harder. We will pass the mutation function. So for the mutation function, I can literally copy and paste what is here, which was my function. And that's more or less all. So let's try to see what it does now. Maybe reload. OK, so apparently the call is made. But as you can see, the result is not visible because it hasn't changed, because we are actually not refreshing the data after the mutation, which is displayed in the component. So we will add that. You will see that's super easy, because we can add keys, not key, but keys, value, a keys property, which will tell Pinia Colada to refresh the queries which have these keys. I think return will be easier. So here, that's actually this query, which was fetching the data of the character. This query has this kind of key, contact id.value. So I will tell Pinia Colada to refresh that specific query, the query which has also that key. So let's have a try. So we are patching, and as you can see, after the patch, we had a get. And normally, it should be, I didn't check if it was working. Oh, yeah, it's working. I would have loved to show you more, especially like doing an optimistic update or things like this. But I see that we are running out of time, so I think I will go straight to the next topic, because it's quite an important one. But if you want to talk more about queries and mutations, like, feel free to come to me later after the talk. So that was for the demo. So now I would like to speak to another subject, which is tightly related with Pinia Colada, which is data loaders. Does anyone has heard about data loaders as well? OK. Well, that's normal. That's also super new, and I don't think it's still not completely officially even so it's usable. It hasn't been much talked about a lot. Well, anyway. So, what are data loaders? Data loaders are an RFC and a project which have been created by still Eduardo. And so that's a very big RFC, and you can have a look on it. It started this RFC like 2 years ago. It's super, super long. And yeah, that's not like something, that's kind of big project. And it's available currently in the unplugin view router, so you can already use it. It's working very well. And the goal of these data loaders is to solve suspense limitations, which are, for example, the deduplication of requests, local fetching and error states, because with suspense, if you have, you cannot locally handle the loading state or the error state. You have to handle this on the page basis. Cascading loading states, if you have typically with suspense, if you have one component which is asynchronous, and which has a child which is also asynchronous, then you will have to wait for the first component to be resolved before the second component, the child component, starts resolving. So this can be quite long if you have nested asynchronous components. There is a question of the updates if the parameters changes. For example, in our application, we have one of the query which is depending on the ID of the character, and but we will see that in 1 second. And also the question of preloading. So, if you are interested, I would strongly suggest you to have a look on this talk by Eduardo. He did a talk at Frontend Nation. It's available on YouTube, of course, and where he explains why data loaders and also the API of data loaders. Great. And so the question now is, how does it relate to Pinia Colada? Well, actually, Pinia Colada has been designed to work with data loaders. And I will show you right now how it can work. That will be really just like a glimpse about data loaders, how they work, and how Pinia Colada can fit inside. But that's really just to give you like kind of, yeah, a glimpse on the subject. So let's take back this page, which is the character page. So as I mentioned, we have here a query which is dependent on these parameters, this query param, which is the ID of the character. So currently, what are we doing? We are using the ID here in the key of the query, which makes the query automatically dependent on this parameter. And we are watching the parameter in our component in order to update it if we change root. So if we want to use a data loader, then it will look like this. Sorry. Oh, I cannot uncomment. Excuse me. Yes. So here is what a data loader looks like. So that's basically a script which is executed before the script setup, before the component is rendered, and so on. And the idea of the data loader is to fetch all the data that we need before the component is rendered. So it looks a bit like suspense in that regard, but actually, and I won't have the time, of course, to say more about that, but actually, as I mentioned previously, it will enable us to have much more fine-grained and much more control about how the data are loaded and cached. And precisely about the cache, that's where Pinia Colada enters in the stage. I don't know how to say that. Because data loaders have loaders, specific loaders, and in particular, there is one which is specially made for Pinia Colada, which will enable us to work with these two tools together. So, how does it work? I will just remove this to remove a bit, to make it workable. Okay. So here, we are basically doing exactly the same thing as what we were doing in our component, in our query. We have the same function. And we have actually the same configuration here, except in the state time, but it doesn't matter. We have here the same configuration as the one that we would pass to a query, except that we are passing it to the Colada loader. And then this Colada loader will return us a composable, use user data. And that's this composable that we will be using here. So I can remove it, this, and instead I will use the composable exported by the data loader. So again, data is the contact, and we get it from there, use user data. And that's all. And now it should be working. Let's see. It's working. So yeah, that's basically all. Absolutely all. Yeah, I'm already out of time. Well, so that's all for the demo and actually for the talk. If you are interested in the demo or in the slides, here are the links. And otherwise, then I just have to say thank you, Dankeschön, and I'm absolutely available to speak about this topic later if you feel like. Thank you.